It's good seeing everybody here and a number of familiar faces. I always enjoy coming to OARC. It's fun to talk about DNS and obsess with other people similarly inclined. Would also like to thank our sponsors, VeriSign and Salesforce. We have a little bit different this time. We've been trying to vary where we do co-locate our conferences to get sort of wider penetration, some new folks in, and this is a new experiment with ICANN. And for those of you that were there yesterday, I think that it worked out fairly well. It was interesting to see what they're doing and where the technical pieces meet the policy pieces. Those of us that have gone to ICANN before have usually been burned out on the pure policy side. It's nice to actually get to the stuff that affects us. And as far as this weekend, as usual, the program committee has come up with some very interesting stuff. DNS is once again also in the news. It's fun to be both the defense and attack on malware of the day or the week. Rather sad to see things like Windows XP, of course, still out there and relevant, but DNS, for all that it's pushing into 30 years of use, is still very relevant and pretty much necessary. So I don't want to tie up a lot of time here, but thank you very much for coming. And as usual, fill out the surveys and give us feedback on what you liked and didn't like about it. And have a great session.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So we have over a day and a half of technical meat for you, but I'm afraid that first of all is the governance vegetables. So I guess I'm a vegetable, but anyway. To start with, I'd just like to give you an update of what we've been doing in OARC since the last workshop in Dallas. Okay.
No, you need to put the switch to the keys.
Okay, so a few admin things first. The network we're using is the same network as the ICANN meeting, so you'll see it on different SSIDs from what you usually see at an OARC meeting. So there's one SSID for in here, and there's another one for outside. So as Paul says, we're very grateful for ICANN for hosting us this time round. Basically, they've covered pretty much all of our costs, and I've done a really great job in terms of handling all the admin for us. So it's an experiment. We know in the past you said you want to be located with the main ICANN meetings. As Paul says, there's a good technical focus here. Please let us know what you think about co-locating with the other ICANN meetings that have taken place this week. We know it clashes with RIPE 74. It's very much our preference to do OARC meetings the weekend before RIPE 74 for a whole bunch of reasons that wasn't possible this time. I hope those of you who made the trip over from Budapest yesterday or the day before, it wasn't too bad. But there's a survey. Please let us know what you think. In the event the fire alarm goes off, there are no drills scheduled, so please just basically leave, go down the stairs, follow the signs to outside of the hotel. If you have any concerns about dietary requirements, please speak to Dinesh, who will be able to address that with the hotel catering staff. Lunch is one floor up. If you basically get the stairs one floor up, then the lunchroom is up there. We'd like to do a PGP signing session tomorrow, but nobody has stepped up as a volunteer to coordinate that. So if you're interested in doing that, please let us know, and we'll do it during lunch tomorrow. To help you out, the badge lanyards are color-coded. If it's a red one, then that means it'll work staff board or PC, so that's somebody you can go to if you need any help with anything. First-timers, yellow, welcome. It's great to see you. And please, everybody, take the time to approach a first-timer and make them welcome in our community. Everybody else is a blue lanyard. If somebody has a different colored lanyard, then they probably shouldn't be here. We'd like the lanyards back, but you're very welcome to keep the badges. We're webcasting on the YouTube channel. Big thanks to Dave from Snake Hill, who is being our webcast master again. There's also a Jabber room for remote participation interactions. Try not to make any beeping noises from your various devices. If you have questions, please queue at the microphone at the front here. And for the benefit of the people on the webcast, identify yourself and your affiliation before asking a question. There's social media, the usual channels on #OARC26. Speakers, we still have 1 or 2 slide decks, please, but thank you to all the other speakers who already uploaded their slide decks in good time. That helps us a lot. If you have any special AV requirements, then please speak to Dave or Jerry, who can help out. We have a timekeeper volunteer at the front here, so please watch out. The countdown is to the end of your talk, not the end of the slot. So the countdown is to the start of the Q&A at the end of your talk. If you're up here, please put your device in airplane mode, or leave it so you don't emit RF into the AV equipment. And thank you. All of our speakers come here on their own time and expenses, and we very much appreciate your contribution because we wouldn't have a workshop without them. So that's the admin stuff. I'd like to give you a status update of what the hell OARC has been doing for the past 6 months or more. I will try not to spend too much time on the routine stuff whilst hopefully giving those of you who haven't been before an idea of what's going on. So our mission statement, it's making a difference to the DNS infrastructure of the world. Distribution of clue, spreading of best practice, helping us all understand how this thing works better and making it work more effectively, and protecting the internet from the various ways in which it can be abused or can be used to detect or mitigate abuse. So some recent achievements over the past few months. Every couple of years or so, we get the board, and this time we managed to get all the staff together for a retreat to consider OARC strategy for the coming years. So we did that in February. We have some strategy output I'd like to share from you on that. We finally got both of our sites in Ottawa up and running to provide us with fully sort of time zone and jurisdiction diverse hosting for our infrastructure and data. Digital 2017 is just finished. It's another bumper collection, so thank you all for your contribution to that. I'll say a bit more about that later. We also did a special ditto in the second part of last year for the root zone size key increase that was conducted. Comcast gave us some funding for a cool new tool called Drool, the DNS replay tester, which we then subsequently released. We've taken over ownership of a couple of orphaned pieces of open source DNS tool software out there, DNS cap, and also more later. We now have RSAC 002 data from pretty much all the root operators, so they're making all the data public individually. We're basically acting as a central repository for that. We also relocated our physical office, where the paperwork is stored and where the envelopes arrive, has been relocated from California to Ohio. So from an operational point of view, we're now completely autonomous of ISC. Here are our members, or rather, here are our paying members. We have nearly 100 members now. So all of you who contribute funding to OARC, thank you very much. It's great to have you in our family tree. We have a bunch of new members, 4 new supporter members, Argentinian academic networks, Brigham Young University, Telecom Britannia, and we've also formalized reciprocal supporter arrangements, the center. PCH have signed up as a blue member, and we've arranged with Snake Hill Labs to give them bronze membership in return for providing our webcasting on a formal basis twice a year for workshops. Other new bronze members that we can welcome aboard: NameShield, the Internet Society, NS1, Craigslist, DNS Belgium, Fastly, Domain Tools, and Amazon. And I'm also pleased to report that we have just signed off Nick.at is also a member. So welcome, all of you. It's great to have you on board, and appreciate your support. A few of our members have upgraded. VeriSign, I'm very pleased to say, I've upgraded to a new top level Diamond membership. Switch have gone up to silver from bronze, and the University of Maryland route operator has come forward as blue, previously supporter. You can see here, membership continues to grow. We had a little bit of an issue in 2012, 2013 when we seemed to have a very large number of sort of legacy unpaying members, so we've cleaned that up, and we continue to grow members at not exactly hockey stick rates, but it's a nice steady organic growth. So we should sign our 100th member very shortly, which will be nice. Just want to restate some of OARC's governance principles. Really, we're independent, we're neutral. We have various industry best practice approaches for nonprofit membership organizations to give us that. We've elected board, our staff are all contracted, the program committee is entirely volunteer, we have formal nonprofit status in the US and California. Board members, there's been a few changes there. Paul Ebsman's Comcast representative, Jacques, we welcomed onto the board in October from CERA. Liam has replaced one of our board members for DNS Oracle, and then Andre, we decided on Monday that Andre is now the co-chair of the board, and George and Dwayne have obviously been in service for a while. One thing I'd just like to say from a sort of executive point of view is that a lot of non-profit bodies that we use to manage internet governance and operations, usually the board members are appointed as individuals. With OARC, it's a little different. For historical reasons, the membership belongs to the organization, not the individual. This worked great in terms of looking after member interest until you get to the point where people start changing jobs. And we've had a lot of churn in the board, which means that there's an admin overhead in terms of doing paperwork and who's got keys to the bank account and just briefing people and getting them on board. It does lead to a slight lack of continuity. So I'd just like to put the question out there. Maybe we can discuss this later. Do we want to consider changing this so the board appointments belong to individuals rather than members? You might still want to have a requirement that they still work for a member even if they continue servicing as a board member in an individual capacity. Program committee, the program committee members stick their hands up, please. Thank you all for being here and for all the work that you've put in. Ray has stepped up as the new program committee chair. Jacques has taken over board liaison from Dwayne, but you know, the program committee does a lot of work to make sure that we have a good program, so I appreciate their contribution. Staff, all of us are here except for William, who's unfortunately unable to be here this time, and our bookkeeper, Pam. Hopefully you all know who we are. There's a picture of all of us there. Any aspect of OARC that you have questions about or need help with, please feel free to talk to us. The engineering resource is full-time. The rest of us share working for OARC with other responsibilities. Quick recap of the membership categories. Really, the important things here are that the platinum subscription has increased slightly when we introduced the diamond as the new top tier. Supporters, we want something in kind from you. You know, we're a small resource limited organization. We appreciate that academic researchers may be as well. But if you want supporter membership, then please contribute in some way, whether that's submitting data or doing presentations or publishing papers or services. And the blue category is for small organizations and members, so you know, below $1 million revenue, below 10 employees roughly, although there is some discretion there. So we had the retreat, which was generously hosted by VeriSign, provided space and facilitation help at the end of January in Reston, just before NANOG. Basically, we do retreats roughly every 2 years. Back in 2013, we actually produced a strategic plan, which has been very successful in terms of guiding the organization, but we kind of used it up from a strategy point of view. We achieved a lot of the objectives in it, maybe not quite the top line of growth that we were hoping in terms of numbers, but in general, it was good to look back and say, yeah, we've made good headway on all of these points. So it was over 3 days, but we didn't have all the staff on board for all 3 days. We kind of overlapped it a little bit and had some separate sessions. So, what was the take home in terms of strategy? In general, one of the things that seemed to be good consensus between the board and the staff as to what the strategy and direction of OARC was, which was good, because I've been to these sessions before where nobody has any clue or there's contention, and there was neither of these. So we're pretty happy with the strategy as it is. We need to enhance it rather than radically overhaul it. One of the things we've done over the past 2 years is run the organization at a deficit, which was a deliberate burn down of our cash reserves in order to grow the organization. We've got to the point where we're pretty confident that we can now run on a break-even basis. So we don't need to, and we can still keep the organization running and grow it. So we don't need to run it at a deficit anymore, which is nice to know. There are some things that we need to adjust about the membership fees and the workshop fees to respond to the changing market conditions, issues of consolidation in the industry, issues of scaling issues with running off workshops and conferences in the community as a whole. We have some specific ideas in consulting and engaging with the members, more about that in due course. We kind of thrashed around a bit in terms of finding workshop venues for the past 2 or 3 workshops. There are some specific challenges I want to say more about on that, but we have figured out a more structured methodology, and we will be using that going forward to hopefully make it more deterministic and more rapidly convergent in terms of where the workshops are. We'd like to get some working groups going and basically use the board and officer resources to help with that. It's pretty clear that the whole issue of data privacy just seems to be a bigger and bigger can of worms. So we have some ideas about a survey that we want to do to get your views on this and try and figure out where we're going forward. Being in the loop for incident and operational security has kind of been a stated objective of OARC from day one, but in practice, people tend to use other channels. We can't force people to use OARC as the operational coordination watch floor 24/7 for the internet. So we see our role as a facilitator rather than an actor there. There's no point in burning too many resources on things where people would rather use other forums for that. And how do we prioritize the various opportunities that we see? Well, there are always too many opportunities in this industry. We think that for a non-profit, sustainability is important, reputation is important, relevance is important. So these are the kind of principles that we'll use to prioritize things. So I know I'm talking to mostly engineers in the room and you don't really want to hear about the financials, but it's good practice to give you an update on this. We just had the auditors complete the draft of our financial statements. Once again, there are no specific issues there. Everything's in good shape, in some ways slightly better shape than it's been for a while. Although we finished on paper with a 100K deficit, in practice, a lot of that was not actually a cash deficit. It was depreciation on past donated infrastructure. So our cash position is roughly the same at the end of 2016 as we went into it. There's a paper deficit of 100K. We planned for that. It was basically pretty much on budget. We've approved a budget for 2017. I'm pleased to say that target's break even, and we're already tracking that. I'm going to show you some year-to-date figures for the first third of the year. And our cash reserves have remained pretty consistent around 250K, 250K, 275. So budget, we're targeting 740K, which is basically about 10% more than last year. Expenses will actually be slightly less than last year, with some extraordinary expenses last year because of various relocations that we had to do. We do not have the CapEx or one-off costs associated with that. So by the end of 2017, we should start to be building our reserves a little bit. Member fees, again, there's the same kind of level of growth projected in terms of signing up new members. Again, we're slightly behind that for the year to date, but we generally find that the member fees are weighted towards the end of the year in terms of when they come in. Workshop sponsorship fees basically the same level as previously, and we're actually starting to see some success in bringing in project funding as well. So we should, in theory, finish the year with the with surplus, but we're certainly tracking break even so far. Expenditure, most of our expenditure is on the staff. I think the way things are going, we should be able to slightly increase the time of some of the contractors this year. Less CapEx this year because we don't have one-off costs, and we also had a storage donation. Co-location costs are much the same. Workshop costs slightly down because of ICANN helping us out this time. Other costs, a significant chunk of that is travel, obviously as a consequence of having a distributed team and attending workshops and being present at other stakeholder relevant events. So wanted to say a little bit more about workshops. We have 2 per year. They're roughly 2 days long. There seems to be strong consensus this is a good way. Whenever we've asked you, we always get feedback that says, do you want us to co-locate with right now, like ICANN and ITF, and we've been kind of rotating these. This has been challenging for 2017 for various reasons. As I say, we've developed a methodology we'll use in future, but we also did a survey over the past couple of weeks, and one of the main things we wanted to ask you about was how we do workshop stuff. Also, we're always looking for workshop sponsors. Basically, we try and break even each workshop on the basis of sponsorship and some registration fees. So if you're interested in sponsoring a future meeting, please speak to Dinesh. He's offering you a deal if you commit soon. Workshop attendance, there was one sort of big spike the last time we co-located with a full-strength ICANN meeting, but you can see again there's reasonably steady growth with some variances for which part of the world we're in. But this isn't just an OARC challenge. You know, Dinesh and I are involved in running other industry conferences, and co-locating is getting harder. There seems to be more demand for conference venues globally, which means that the prices are going up and the availability is not necessarily as easy as it thinks. It's taking longer. The events that we're co-locating with are getting bigger. They're having other stuff co-locating them. They're going to bigger and more expensive venues, which is limiting our options. It's not intractable, but it's just more pain than it should be. And I think one of the things that came out of the retreat when we were talking about workshops is that it's very clear that co-location helps you. It reduces your travel budget. It saves you time from having to do multiple trips to multiple places. But it takes more OARC resources to plan and to host. And the output was, let's see if we can quantify this and use that as a way of guiding what we do. So thank you for the 30 of you that responded to the survey about workshops. We asked how many days per year does co-locating save you in terms of travel time, and it seems to be quite a lot. You know, for some people it's maybe 1 day per workshop, but it can be several days depending on what part of the world you're coming from. So we also asked, well, how much money does it save you from your travel budget? And it turned out the average was quite high, $2,700. And then we said, well, okay, if this is saving you money in terms of co-locating, would you be prepared to pay more registration fees to help us give us more options in terms of running the meetings? Not so much coming across there in terms of saving, but $300, $450. Some of you are prepared to pay more for the convenience of co-location, so it's good to know that. We also wanted to ask about, what are you as members prepared to pay? What do you as members think that we should be charging other attendees? If we keep the current level of sponsorship, then the strong consensus among members is that this is a benefit that should be included in your membership, and we should be charging the other attendees basically what it costs for us. The alternative was to encourage new members by spreading the cost. There was slightly less support for that, but definitely some support for that. Also, these first 2 answers suggest there is strong support for the current sponsorship model. If we just went away from the sponsorship model and charged everybody, then there is more limited support for that. So that's useful data. If you've used that, please let us know. Or if you didn't finish the survey, again, we're still open to input on that, but we'll take that into account in future planning. Quite a few other things which we'll digest as far as the workshop, which are useful. We wanted to test, is there a level of support for a 3rd workshop of a year? And the answer is, it depends. So we need to spend some more time figuring out what that. If we're going to add workshops with kind of our current usual North American, European venues, then there's more interest in the Asia-Pacific region and Latin American, Caribbean regions. We're all sensitive to the fact that there's been quite a lot of issues recently in terms of restricting travel or additional security measures. And, you know, I don't want to finger any particular countries for any particular attributes, but there were some countries that people mentioned were problematic. But there was a bunch of reasons. It was like, well, you know, South America is too far away for me, or I'm concerned about health issues. Immigration was a concern. Safety was a concern. Surveillance in terms of, you know, how much you're going to be searched when you go across the border is a concern. So there weren't really any surprises in there. It's not an easy space to navigate, especially when you're subject to random decisions short notice decisions by various authorities. So we also wanted to see if there was an idea about some of the content that we get for workshops that isn't necessarily quite presentation level or comes from supporter members who want to share their research but are maybe too nervous to come up and speak for their first piece of work. So there's strong interest in having additional content via posters at workshops. So we're going to work with the program committee on that and do a little bit more. You can see we've started doing posters, but you know, we're hoping more academic research type poster displays. Future workshops, please say OARC 27 is pretty much nailed down. It will be immediately before NANOG 71 in San Jose, California, so we're in the heart of Silicon Valley. Good chance to have lots of attendees, good chance to have lots of sponsors, so you've got something to submit, we'd love to hear about it. We're also just trying to keep the possibility that we might not be, there may be issues with having this in the US, so we're keeping that as a back pocket, although at the moment it's not obvious what we would do there. OARC 28 in a year's time, likely in Latin America and the Asia Pacific region. We're trying to figure out what would make sense for us to hook up with. And then OARC 29, it is our intention in 18 months to co-locate with both Right 76 and also with the Center Tech meeting, which is something we've wanted to do for a while. So what we're going to do for the rest of the year, we have a bunch of actions that came out of the retreat strategy. We want to do another survey on your attitudes to data privacy and to establish a data privacy subcommittee to try and figure out what we're going to do there. Say a bit more when I do William's talk, upgrade the analysis capacity and cluster. The Canadian sites, it's probably more of a 2018 target, but we have our infrastructure in Ottawa spread across 2 locations there. We may decide to consolidate these into one, which may be in Ottawa or Toronto. I'm afraid that having moved the office from California to Ohio, it now needs to follow me. My next move is to Indiana, so that's something tedious, but hopefully not that you will necessarily have much visibility of. It's going to disrupt me a little bit over the summer. We have a couple more DITLs, special DITLs. We do one off day in the life of the internet collections for the root KSK rollover that Matt Larson was talking about yesterday. So that'll be September, October timeframe, just to make sure that if anything terrible happens, then we have a record of it, or if anything, if it goes all smoothly, then there's a record of it. And a longer term target that we came out of from the retreat is we would like to grow the organization to 1 million revenue on a sort of 2-year time scale. And we've also set some cash reserve targets for that as well. So that is most of what I wanted to say wearing my president hat. Happy to take any questions or comments, and then we have a few more other things to deal with. Any questions?
That's it? Yeah. Keith, do you want to discuss the membership, organization member versus person right now, or when?
We're running a little bit behind at the moment. Could we maybe punt that to the end of the morning session? Okay. Okay. So I think basically we're now ready to hand over to the engineering content. My colleague Jerry is going to be talking about all the things he's been doing with software development.
So good morning. My name is Jerry, and I'm the software engineer at OARC. Before I go into the updates, I'm just going to talk briefly about the stuff we actually have. So the process for software development that I try to follow is using the common tools that are out there and the common processes. We use Jenkins and Travis for our CI, Convert-to-Scan for code analysis, and we compile and test on the latest major distributions. And we also try to do packages for them. Some of the software we have, the most known one is the DNS statistics collector. We also have a presenter for it. And we have a new tool called DEC data tool. And this can read the XML data from DEC and convert it and do stuff with it. And it can be used to import it into other databases such as Influx. So you can present it in Grafana, for example. Sorry, I had to run to the toilet because the coffee was going straight through. And then we have DNS cap that we got from IEC last year. And we have a new tool called Drew to replay the traffic. There's also a small tool I've wrote developing Drew called DumDumD, which just drops everything it gets. We have services. Some of the old ones are the web-based testers. For replay size, port, DNS entropy. We also have TLDmon to monitor TLD zones, which you can actually subscribe to and tell us monitor our zones, and we will do that. There's a new Dane tester, web-based. And then CheckMyDNS that I started last year. And CheckMyDNS is also the tool that is actually going to replace the top ones, the replay size, port test, and DNS entropy. That's going to be baked into the CheckMyDNS. And maybe also Dane, we'll see. We have a bunch of libraries. And this is my try to pull out the code that's common in all of the different software and make a library for it, so I can just update that and I can push it to the different tools. So we have the PCAP thread is a helper library for reading PCAPs and spinning up threads. Oh my God DNS is a library for parsing DNS. And it supports also parsing totally broken invalid stuff. So you can actually get a marker where it stopped recognizing DNS. There's a few others, and last year at IETF, I made the Perl bindings for GetDNS, sorry. And a few weeks ago, I made a Go binding for IPAtlas. So, to the updates. For DEC, threads and fork are bad. So we had a lot of reports that there were strange lockups and things happening that wasn't really that good. And it turns out that different system libraries, they use threads. They use mutex, of course, since they need to be supported in threaded environments. But they don't actually install the correct handles for marking when you're forked. So if you're unlucky, the mutex is already locked, and then you fork, and then some other process tries to unlock that, and yeah, you get deadlocks. So for DEC, threads has been disabled. We also had a lot of reports for inconsistent statistics, and this was, of course, due to threads, but also very weird select behavior. So what happened was that the select timeout was increased from around 200 milliseconds to 1 second, and select is kind of strange on the system I tried it on, at least, for the first period. So even if I know it's receiving data, it's not timing out or returning that data is available. And all of this has been solved, of course, disabling threads, but also giving more options to DEC for increasing the pickup buffer and tweaking the timers. There's also a new option called no wait interval, because DEC was actually trying to sync to the timing interval you had. And you can use this to skip that and just start collecting and storing the statistics of the data directly. If you use this, you might actually need to tweak your own tools, because this is going to create a data file that's not using so the first data file coming out before the interval is synced is not going to have the 5 minutes or whatever you set it to. To prevent this next time, I've set up our Jenkins platform to start up DEC on all the platforms, and I have another VM pushing 10 QPS on it, and we have jobs monitoring everything. And I let this run for a week or so before doing a release next time, so hopefully this won't happen again. And special thanks to Anand, Klaus, and Vincent for helping me reporting and helping me fix this. It's been really helpful. So, DNS replay tool. As Keith said, it's a Comcast Innovation Fund sponsored project, and we have a beta out. And I really would like some feedback. Even if you use it and it works, I would like to know that, because I haven't really had any feedback. And during the release, we also had an idea of creating a repository of PCAPs, good and bad, within OARC. So if that is something interesting, please come up, say that, talk to us. Let's maybe get it going. So some of the features are manipulating timing between the packets. So you can just say ignore the timings or speed up, slow down. You can loop the PCAPs. You can replay everything over TCP if you want, but your system is more or less going to blow up. Yeah, and more. So here's a small example. And on the top line, you see it's giving a config as a text. And it says timing, ignore. Set the target to the local host, port 353. Skip reply, sorry. And send everything you find as UDP and spin up 3 of these pools. So it's going to use more threads. And as I was testing this on my local machine back home, I was able to produce a little over 1 million packets per second. Yeah. Future improvements, parse the response and match it, and a lot more statistics around that. Increase the performance, and we're going to have a nice talk later today. I think it was about using hardware SDKs to actually talk to network cards, so that's actually something I'm going to look at also. More statistics overall, of course, and then the massive client IP simulation, where you would be able to, with the correct network setup, to actually use the client IPs from the PCAP. But that's going to, yeah, you're going to need a very specific network setup to actually get the responses back and not have the network equipment say, hey, this is fake IP addresses and stuff like that. Yeah, so DumDumD, it's just a small program using libev or libuv to receive whatever you send to it and just do nothing with it. The RIPE Atlas bindings I attended I think I said it maybe, attended a RIPE DNS measurement hackathon, was playing around with the Atlas API. So I took that code and made it into a Go package. So it has backends for JSON files, for RESTful API, and for the streaming API. And all the measurement results objects are native Go objects. And this is a small example. So you have an interface called Atlaser, or Atlaser, I don't know. And in this example, it takes a streaming backend, and then calls the measurement results for DNS. And you get back a Go channel, which you can consume and do whatever you want with the results. So next is check my DNS. So I was thinking about showing some statistics. So I made some small scripts to actually see if anyone has been testing or something like that. And there's actually been a few. So we get around average 20 people, people using the tool every day. That's quite nice. The number of unique net names from the WHOIS data isn't that much, so more or less from the same networks. The number of queries, okay, there's a lot of queries compared to tests. And this graph isn't really that surprising. It's more UDP than TCP. But this was quite interesting. And if we zoom in, we actually see there's more V6 than V4 coming in. That's good. And the statistics are up on the website. And remember that all this data that's collected from Check My DNS is actually available if you want to look at it. So come ask us, and we'll get you access. I'm re-implementing Check My DNS in Go to speed it up and to be able to have a better API and things like that. And this is a screenshot of the new interface I'm working on. And I think that's that. Any questions?
Hi, Alex Mayova from Nick.at. I was wondering, are you having plans for Drool to also support DNS over TLS and DNS over DTLS eventually?
I haven't thought about it, but sure, we can add that.
Great.
I don't know the use case for replaying. Well, yeah, sure, if you have a small subset of data, but there's a kind of so Drool is actually in user land, so you can run it as a normal user, and if you replay a couple of 100,000 queries as TCP, your system is just going to go bleh.
That's exactly the point. Yeah. So as soon as we see like some deployment of DNS or TLS, we need some kind of tools to actually replay actual traffic to our in development servers and understand how resource consumption would change if like a couple of % of users would switch to TLS. Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, Peter van Dijk, Power DNS. In Power DNS we have DNS replay, which is similar to Drool.
Yeah.
It has a flag to eDNS client subnet stamp, the original client. You might consider that because we found that it works very well for testing.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. So, William, our systems engineer, was unable to be here, but he did send a bullish proxy for us. So I'm just going to give a quick run through of William's slides, give you an update on where our infrastructure is at. William's slides. So it's been a busy year for William. Okay, thanks. So, overall, things are probably more stable than they've been for a while. We relocated everything to Hurricane Electric at Fremont, California a year ago. That's been running pretty smoothly. The Indico platform that we use for the workshops has been working pretty well as well, but there is some updates in the pipeline that we really need to catch up with, mostly from a functionality and performance point of view. Obviously, we don't like to mess with that before a workshop, so that is something that we'll be working on once OARC 26 is completed. All the analysis and file servers are now uniform NFS mounts through the 10 gig network that we have in the Fremont site. Secondary site in Ottawa is spread across 2 locations, one of which is donated by Sierra. We also have some space from the Optics Exchange. And that's partly to do with bandwidth versus versus space, essentially, which is why we've been able to had to split it. At the Optics site, we have the FS6 mirror image of all our data set, AN3 servers available to do analysis work on that to spread the load a little bit. And then mostly it's resilience functions that are the Sierra site. We also have some infrastructure in Sweden, which is generously provided by NetNode. Again, further diversity and also development platform that Jerry uses there. Data set, basically, we essentially have 3 copies of this. We have a live copy in Fremont. We have a consolidated mirror of that. And then we have another mirror of the entire data set in Ottawa. Basically about half a petabyte of capacity total spread across 3 copies of the data set, the main data set, plus some additional things. William started looking at XZ compression for the whole archive, but there were some questions about, is that actually a wise form of compression to use for long-term data storage? So we put that on hold for now. There are other possibilities in terms of data compression which are out there that we're investigating. And there's a constant sort of optimization game going on there. After some consideration and a bit of consultation, we decided it would more utility in our analysis cluster uniformly running Linux rather than a mixture of BSD and Linux. No BSD diehard screamed. It makes the maintenance easier. It also gives us some possibilities for clustering. So everything is now running Linux and being migrated. That seems to be good. If there was particular tools that you need, then by all means ask and William can get them set up for you. So that's 4 servers that are uniform. Say a little bit more about that in a minute. New data coming in all the time. As I mentioned, we have a consolidated archive, the RSAC 002 data that's been published by the root operators. There was a little bit of an issue with GRoot as falling the wrong side of their military-grade firewalling. We're working on fixing that just to make sure that we get a complete GRoot data set. We also continue to have some AS112 queries, some from ICANN from the DITL exercises, and some from operators closer to home that we work with. As I mentioned, the zones signing key rollover happened in October 2016 successfully. I'm grateful to ICANN and VeriSign for donating additional disk space so that we could do that. We started using 8 terabyte disks for the first time. They seem to work well. That's gone well. Query-only collection at the start of October. 6 terabyte total data set. It's there if you want to have a look at it. We just finished DITL 2017, our annual day in the life of the internet collection. Thank you everybody who contributed. We had a wide range of contributors, nice data set. Over 10 terabytes total makes it our biggest DITL collection by volume so far. Actually, since William did this slide, there's an update which is it is pretty much all in. Interestingly, when we do these exercises, sometimes interesting other stuff comes in, and indeed there was an attempt to abuse our open validating resolver service, so we have a capture of that during the DITL, so that may be of interest to some of you. We also use the processing power of the file servers to clean the data set up, and using that for the FS4 has worked well. Again, that data set is now available, so if you're interested in having a look, by all means. Some good metadata on the DITL collection, more notes for researchers. So again, if you're a researcher and you're interested in DITL dataset, read the label. There are some important comments there. It's interesting. Our previous DITL datasets were used for the CEDAR study, and I was just chatting with one of the researchers on that at the beginning of the week, they discovered quite a few gotchas and glitches and interesting things in there, and no data set is perfect. It may well be that actually doing an audit by one or more researchers is going in there and having a look at the data set, getting a better understanding documented of how it's imperfect, and we could then use that as feedback into anyone who's doing research would understand the caveats and limitations, but it should also help us improve our data collection processes in the future and potentially also the submitters. Because of privacy concerns, we decided that we would offer the upload option. If you don't like uploading your data to the USA, you can upload it to Canada. Nobody did this. So that means either people are not concerned about uploading data to the USA, or they're happy about the degree of anonymization they applied to the data, or they don't think Canada's any better. So again, feedback in that would be helpful, but we won't be offering DITL upload out of our Canadian site in future. Also, the coverage maps that show how much the data has been uploaded, which is a guidance tool to the contributors, there's still some work to be done on them. We also managed to discover in the process of it that some of the database scripts that are used to track the upload were incorrect and need to be corrected, and it appears that we may need to apply this retrospectively over all the data sets over the past dozen years. So again, it's not great that we found it, it's not great that this happened, but it's good that we found it and understand this. We also found that some contributions were not quite what we expected. When we were at ISC's location, we were on the back end of some 10 gigabit dark fiber. So when we switched to HE, we're only in a sort of regular 1 gig transit pipe that the rest of the world has. So we were a little bit nervous about would we be able to cope. The answer is we were. So that's good. A reminder that we also peer at the SF Mix Exchange in Fremont. So we'd love to have members peering with us across that in addition to our transit. Additional transit is certainly something that we'll be looking at in the future. We keep track of the traffic stats, and this is how William discovered that someone was trying to abuse our validating resolver during the DITL study. So here are some of the stats that show that. Other than using the data archive, we redeployed some disks to give us some additional capacity. We're all set up and ready to do the KSK collections in October when the KSK is rolled. So, we will need to add further capacity to do DITL next year, basically. We inherited a Dane tester from one of our members. So if you're interested in testing Dane, that tool is out there. We don't know how much interest is going to be in this, but of course, all our tools gather stats, so we can look at the stats and we can figure out, is this interesting or not. So again, if you're interested in that tool, let us know. If you had feedback on how useful that is, let us know. Another service that we offer is zone file repository and archive of the root zone going back as far into time as we can possibly manage. We even have them as far back as 1993 and 94. Welcome more samples of that to keep backfilling the archive. Interestingly, obviously we can look at that data and do a little bit of analysis. We can see that there's a flat level of increase, and there are also some gotchas there. You can find the data set there. This shows you what the GTLD growth has been like, tracked by the ZFR service. We also operate our TLDmon, which is kind of like a Nagios interface, a Nagios instance monitoring the various top-level domains. There's an automated process to add all the new GTLDs, so it's slightly over 1,500. We have a primary instance of that in Fremont, a secondary one in Sweden, and an experimental one in Ottawa, so that gives us 3 views into it. It's an interesting tool. If you haven't looked at it before, do have a look. We think we may be able to do some interesting stuff with this going forward. We also wanted to support the DNS Prive initiative. Last year, we spun up a couple of experimental servers, one using some ISI lab software and one using an Unbound instance. And we basically, they don't really provide privacy. What they provide is a test bed. So we do actually archive all the data for that. And these are the IP addresses that it's available on and the web page. Please don't use it for production use. Don't assume that it will be up for production use. And needless to say, we have the usual abusers out there who think that, oh, it's an open resolver, let's try and use it for production use or for more nefarious things. That is hooked into our validating DNSSEC resolvers. This is our main way of gathering resolver data. Most of the data that we gather is authoritative. It's harder to get resolver data. We'd run these as DNSSEC test beds. We need to monitor and manage that fairly carefully to make sure that it doesn't break, that it isn't being abused. Again, we keep the archives from that, which are available to you if you find them interesting. The DOS attack that we saw during DITL 2017, there was a DDoS during 2017 which involved a bunch of spoofed addresses that happened on this. So future, our actual servers seem pretty stable and usable for the long term, so we'll be gradually backfilling these with 8 terabyte disks to increase the capacity that we need. We can do further collections, occasional ones as needed in addition to the regular annual ones. Capture servers that we use as a front end for DITL are ancient clunky things, so it's in the budget to upgrade these to something a bit more modern and power efficient. Already talked about, we'd quite like to kind of consolidate the 2 sites in Ottawa into a single Canadian site. One thing we'd like to do is we act as coordinator for AS112 project, and we're occasionally mistaken as the organization that runs all the AS112 instances. We don't. But we'd be quite interested in running AS112 instances in a couple of locations so that we can do collection of the internet's junk. We'll be upgrading Indico in time for the next workshop, and we need to do more work in data collection, descriptions, and the correction of the DITL database stuff. And yeah, the portal is ancient and horrible, and we could really, the underlying database behind it is sound, but the front end really needs some work. Finally, the analysis servers, now that we're running the same OS across all of them, it's time to start thinking about turning this into some kind of modern compute cluster. So William is basically working on putting the libraries and support in place for that. There are obviously a whole bunch of options that we could use for the actual compute cluster technology. Again, it would be interesting to have your feedback on that. Please do let us know if this is something you would like us to do. And that's it as far as the engineering update is concerned. Any questions on what is in William's material? Okay, he's not here, but myself and Jared would be very happy to channel any questions that you might have. So, okay, Dave, can we go back to the slide deck that I had before? Okay, now seems like we've caught up. So now seems like it would probably be a good time to have the discussion about the the board member versus individual, if you wanted to pose that question, Andre.
Andre Seasoning. Keith, you mentioned that there might be a change in bylaws because we have this turnover of the people in the board, changing jobs, mergers, and it's creating some work for you and the organization. So with my member hat on, I'm all for it, and it should be about the people, not about the members, and it's creating, it's confusing that we have this in the bylaws. So and with my board member hat on, I would like to hear from other members what do they think about it.
Jeff Houston, APNIC. I have served on a number of boards over the years, and this is the first time I've come across this kind of the membership, or the member rather, the organisational member rather the individual is on the board. It strikes me as somewhat anomalous insofar as the responsibility of a board member is to the company, the organisation they're serving on the board for, and they have liabilities as much as responsibilities to work in the interest of the entity to which they're on the board. They're not there to bring the interests of their home organisation with them. And having the organisation sit on your board actually creates the potential for conflicts of interest, which is needless and unnecessary. If a person is on the board of OARC, they discharge their duties for OARC and they're working for OARC while on the board, and an individual should be prepared to do that. A member would find that much harder because you're binding the assets and liabilities of OARC to the assets and liabilities of the member organisation, and that's kind of wrong in many ways. So I would advocate strongly the individuals have a much clearer role as individuals on the board of OARC. If you take member organisations, it is, I think, unwarranted and confusing.
Yeah, I think just a few, thanks Jeff. I mean, essentially what you're saying is it's harder to meet the fiduciary duty to the organisation rather than the member organisation. I just want to emphasise this is not an issue with any of the existing or past board members. They've all served the organisation very well, and that is not a concern. So the other thing I'll say is that it's not just a simple fix in the bylaws. It's actually embedded in a bunch of places, so it will involve some wrangling to adjust that. Shane.
So it's Shane Kerr. I'm here from OARC, and I'm one of the people who is guilty of moving between a lot of OARC memberships, although I've never been on the board. And I actually think having representation by the organization makes a certain amount of sense. It is a bit weird, and it was unexpected for me when I encountered it. But membership of OARC is not cheap. It's not always easy to convince an organization to join OARC when you're a staff member like myself. So one of the real benefits to the organization is that you may get representation. And I hear what Jeff is saying about an OARC board member has a responsibility, firstly, in that role to the organization. But a lot of organizations have board membership which represents certain constituencies. And expecting that someone on the OARC board is not going to represent the interest of the organization that put them there, I think is probably a bit naive, and I think we should just go ahead and recognize that. So I guess I'm saying many words, but I kind of think that in the end, having OARC membership, board membership be by the organization is not that bad, and I kind of think we should keep it. So.
Okay, I mean, one other question here is that do you, even if they change organization, you might require the individual to still work for a member, as opposed to, if somebody left their member organization and went off independently, would we still want them in the board? That's a sort of separate consideration.
That's a possibility. I think that make the calculus quite complicated.
It might be an easier bylaws fix, though.
Yeah.
Matt Poundset. So as one of the people who've gone through this, I found it a little bit weird, and the same. I sort of agree with what Jeff is saying. Although I think it's in practice it's probably less of a problem. The potential conflict of interest. However, yeah, I think the continuity issue is probably a bigger problem. And actually, I would go one step further than simply moving it back to requiring them to be I would say require the person to be an employee of a member at the time they're elected. End of story. I think you could leave it up to case-by-case basis. If somebody's moving so far out of the industry that they're not involved anymore, then it's probably best that they resign. But I think forcing somebody out of the board just because they've perhaps moved to somebody who's either not a member or not a member yet is in itself not necessarily helpful, particularly if that non-member organization is still in the industry. I don't see any particular problem with that person still being on the board. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
So I was actually thinking a lot of what Matthew was saying. I think the phrase case-by-case basis actually is an important phrase to consider here. The point that you raised about somebody essentially retiring and whether or not they should still be able to serve a board if they just leave their employer. Also, if somebody changes constituency, moves from one type of organization to another type of organization, and there is a credibility that the makeup of the board was to represent multiple constituencies. However, the point I wanted to make specifically is that a change in job may result in a change in availability to the board and availability to do these things. And so I would say that regardless of what's decided, there should be a moment where the board says we can confirm that we have confidence in this. And there should be some sort of checkpoint there, regardless of whether it's going to be staying with the organization or if it stays with the person during some sort of change. There should be some sort of statement from the board that this is something that they have confidence in. Otherwise, I think this is something that needs to come back to the membership.
Okay, I mean, without recalling the bylaws chapter and verse, there is some discretion in the process. If, for example, a member organisation goes dark and doesn't nominate a new representative within X amount of time, I think the board has the ability to co-opt, but as I say, the devil is in the detail with these things.
Right, exactly. But regardless of any sort of change along those lines, I think ought to involve some sort of vote by the board, a vote of confidence or something along those lines.
Okay.
Hi Keith, Jim Reid. I'm speaking as a non-paying member of OARC, so you can remember what you can do with that. What I'm about to say you can just ignore or pay little attention to. I disagree with what Shame's suggesting with the idea of having board positions tied to memberships or perhaps membership categories. I think OARC as an organisation is fairly small. In a larger setup, say for example ICANN, you can understand why various constituencies should have representation on the board. OARC's nowhere near that. So I don't think that's an appropriate model. And I think maybe another governance model that's a bit simpler might be an easier approach. For example, the NCC has a situation where anybody can stand for the board. They have to be nominated by a member and only the members get to vote. So that could be a simpler way to deal with this issue. I'm also kind of a wee bit unsettled about the idea we talk about approaching things on a case-by-case basis, because that can also be a problem, particularly for very complicated bylaws. So maybe the situation there, sorry Keith, might be is to have another look at those bylaws to see if they could be considerably simplified. I would think the best thing is to have the memberships of the board is by the board members being there by virtue of their standing in the community, and the fact that they represent employer A or employee B should be neither here nor there. I think we should try to keep this as simple and straightforward as possible and resist the temptation to over-engineer it.
Yeah, no, we for the record, we had a couple of special board seats in the past, one for the route operators, and we got rid of that precisely because we wanted to homogenise it.
Hi, Dave Knight, Snake Hill Labs. I was the most recent person to leave the board because of a change of day job. One point of clarity, I think it's been mentioned a few times that a board member is currently an employee of a member. That's not true. It's the chosen representative of the member. So the person who, for example, wins the seat in an election might not actually be the sitting board member. The organisation may then choose to pick anyone else who isn't necessarily their employee. I think we've always had it that they have some kind of relationship. For me, I was never an employee. I was a contractor, but it is whoever they nominate. And then I think I have to agree with a lot of what Jim was saying, that I don't think we need to replace, these existing surprising rules with different rules. We have to keep in mind that members get to choose who the board members are. We have elections and then we have term limits, so they will go away again. The membership does get an opportunity sometime later to express a change in opinion. I don't think we need a lot of rules around this. I think that the membership will do what's in its interest at the time, and it has an opportunity to change its mind if it needs to.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Ray Bellis, ISC. I actually strongly agree with Jeff on this one. I think when we vote as members, we should be voting for the individuals on the basis of how we think they can fulfil a fiduciary duty to the board of OARC, or sorry, to the company of OARC, and not as representatives of the companies that they're employed by. I've served on a couple of boards before. When I left the company, I had to resign that position. I think if somebody leaves, we have no guarantee that the person that is put in by the previous representative's employer is actually going to be capable of doing the job that we expect those board members to do.
Okay, thanks. I'd suggest that we're starting to run out of time, so we'll give Andre the last word on this.
Could I ask the board to actually seek legal advice on this? I suppose my major concern is that if my organisation is sitting on the board of OARC, are the liabilities of OARC, if you will, entailed with the assets of my organisation? And I now placing and opening my assets, my organisation's assets, to any legal action that may incur from actions of the board of OARC? If it's an individual, there's a clear break. If my organisation is actually on the board, to my mind, that is not so clear. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not sure many others are around here, but I suspect as a duly incorporated legal entity, you might wish to have some legal advice as to the liabilities and responsibilities of board members to clarify the individual and organisational liabilities of your board members.
Yeah, I suspect that is not an issue, but it's a good point that we should verify that.
This is Andre again. What Ray said just gave me a thought that we vote for individuals, but right after the person is voted for DNS OARC board, the organization might recall him and nominate somebody else, and we might get somebody we don't really want to be on the board as a members. So the situation is really suboptimal in the case that we are voting for individuals, and as a members we I would say we collectively view that as we are voting for the person there, but in the end we might get with somebody really different, some person we don't want to be on the DNS OARC board for really long term, like because he could be swept right away after the elections.
Okay, thanks. So, I mean, before we make any changes, there's some due process essentially. Okay, I think Jim wants to have the last word.
I didn't want to have the last word, but it was just something else I meant to say is, sorry Keith, it's just that we'd also been another unfortunate situation is if the OARC board lost a good board member because they changed their job. So if there was a good board member that then was moving to a non-member of the organisation, you would still want to have their skills and experience available to the board, and it'd be a crying shame to lose that because the bylaws didn't allow it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that has happened. We've just been fortunate there's always been somebody at least as good to step up and replace, but yeah. So I mean, the process for any changes is that we to take legal advice, consider it in the board, and then essentially there would be resolutions before general meeting of the members, and obviously we're planning our AGM at the end of September. It sounds like there's some reasonable degree of support for change of some kind. probably towards the individual rather than organisation, so I can take an action to go off and consult the lawyers and that. We can have some further board discussion and decide whether we want to put some resolutions before the AGM on this particular issue. Okay, I think that just emphasises the extent to which the organisation works for its members and is supported by those of you in various ways, including the volunteers. So the next thing I wanted to do is one of these pleasurable things, which is that we set up our programme committee 3.5 years ago. Sebastian was the first chair of the programme committee. He hadn't really done a programme committee chair before. We hadn't done a programme committee before. But I think we will all agree that Sebastian did an awesome job. We had some great programs. He organised the programme committee in all kinds of ways. He helped define the role. Sebastian is unfortunately not here with us for this workshop. But what we have done is that we have done him a nice Perspex plaque, which has got this design on it, which has been sent to his offices, and his boss Jay will be giving to him shortly. So I think it would be appropriate if we all just showed our appreciation of Sebastian's service as PC chair. And, like I was saying about when we lose good people, we have good people step up. It's great that we've got Ray on the PC as well. He's been cracking the whip and getting this workshop together and definitely hit the ground running. So the other piece of recognition that we get to do is I understand that IIS have something to give me. Thank you, Ulrich. It's a packet with a Q on it.
It's a packet Q, yes.
Do I get to open it?
Yes, you get to open it. It's open.
Okay. I've even idiot-proofed it.
Yes. Okay. So I actually was approached by Jerry about a software you might know about, Packet Q. And so we thought DNS OARC wanted to take ownership of it and further develop it, and we thought it was a really good idea, and here we are. So,
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So that's great. Thank you, Ulrich, and thank you to Roger and all the other colleagues at IIS. It's good to give a nice piece of software a home, and Jerry will be taking that and factoring it into our existing processes and practices. So, a few quick things before the break. We have an hour at the end of tomorrow for lightning talks. Up to 10 to 15 minutes late breaking. And I guess there's some late breaking topics that people might want to talk about. If you want to submit something, then send it to the program committee via the submissions email address. We'll still ideally upload the slides via Indico, but this is the easiest way to do it. And do it by 4 p.m. today, local time. And we've already had 2 submissions, so get your socks on, and the PC will let you know, and then we can get the slides updated and do the presentations tomorrow. We're also doing a couple of surveys. We want to know what you think about the presentations. We want to know what you think about the workshop logistics and how we run things. That's a QR code for the link there. Please, actually, because we're doing it one a day, you could actually just go into that survey and leave that window open on your desktop and mark as you go. Is probably a great way to do it. We're trying that first time as well. Social event, I'll say a little bit more about that this evening. But basically, the vegetables are done. It's time for coffee. We restart in half an hour at 11:30. Just one final thing. If you are coming in and out the room while the session is running, we're trying to keep the front doors closed and use the rear door. But obviously, the front doors will be open during the break. Well, I will hand you over to the session chair for the next session at 11:30.
Hi, you're Pebble. Hi, Jerry. So we're going to use this laptop for the presentation. Do you have a demo or something going?
No, on the slides.
Have you uploaded the slides yesterday or something? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Good. Then it's the same.
Yes, it's a right version, yeah.
That stuff. Okay.
Good luck.
Yeah. So. Let's see. Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. It's tends to sleep a bit, so.
Yes, thank you so much.
So please down here, even if you have a clicker. Well,
Yeah.
you have a screen up here.
Oh, perfect, yeah.
We're going to do a couple announcements.
Okay.
Then I will introduce you guys and we'll be ready to go.
Yeah.
Keith is there.
Yeah, he's here. Yep.
Sorry?
2 minutes left.
Okay.
You said a couple of words first, are you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, you're good to go.
Sleeps quite quickly. And then when it wakes
What
up,
is
so
that managed?
clicker.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna make sure it's up and running. Before it starts.
Okay, if everyone could please sit down, thank you. Okay, just a few quick announcements before we restart again. Matt Pouncett has kindly offered to coordinate the PGP signing session. So if you're interested in doing that, please can you email your case to pgpsign@dns.org.net. We'll do that tomorrow lunchtime. There's a couple of rooms around the edges that we can use for that. We'll probably do it around 1 o'clock, but we'll confirm the exact time and location tomorrow. But if you can get the keys to Matt ASAP, that will make it easier. Just a brief thank you to our sponsors again, to ICANN for hosting it, for VeriSign for being our main sponsor, and also to Salesforce for sponsoring. And don't forget to fill in the survey. The way we run the sessions for the workshops is that the program committee chairs take turns to be the session chair. So I will now hand you over to Maurizio, who will chair this session.
Good morning. We're going to have two very important presentations. The first one is titled Scaling Up How We Made Millions of Domains Happier. This is from Cloudflare, and we have two presenters, Mr. Pavel Onitsov and Tom Arnfeld.
Hello, I'm very proud to be here and thank you for your interest in my talk. I will talk about how we made millions of domains happier. I'm Pavel Onitsov, I work for Cloudflare. Together with Tom Arnfeld, we are making this talk. As introduction, I would like to tell a short story about Cloudflare. Cloudflare offers security and optimization solutions for different kind of sites. As mandatory part of this service, we definitely need some custom DNS implementation to provide reliable and very fast service. Cloudflare DNS service includes multiple things. One of our main products is authoritative DNS service. We have pretty long list of supported features, for example, we have complete support of IPv6, we have complete support of IPv4. Also, we have support for runtime on-fly signing of DNSSEC records. And we could guarantee very low propagation time for our edges. In addition to this pretty standard stack, I think I could mention a feature like CNAME flattening, which provide an option to increase performance of DNS lookups and provide an ability to use CNAME to different places in domain epochs. Also, we have pretty complicated products built on top of our authoritative service. It's load balancing. Using our load balancing product, you could spread traffic across the planet using our network. In addition to this, for customers who don't want to use our DNS services or need a very, very fast move to our services, for example, in case of huge DDoS attack, we have support for DNS firewall. Previously, it had name as VDNS, but we decided to change it to correctly describe what's going on inside. It's security, it's DNS security proxy with bundled DDoS mitigation. And for all these services, we could provide very detailed and rich analytics about each request's country requesting these records, requested records, some kind of errors, and everything what do you want for it. If you're speaking about some technical solutions and how you could improve it, you definitely need to keep in mind your scale. Our scale is about more than 100 points of presence spread across the planet. It's not a number of our servers. We have thousands of servers. And using these numbers, we will start to improve our existing infrastructure to provide better services. So we're speaking about numbers of zones. So we have 5.5 million DNS zones at this moment. If I saw this graph about our average load, I don't think it surprises you because not so much traffic. It's near 1 million queries per second. But unfortunately, it was so complicated to find such traffic in our graphing system because usually it looks like this one. I think this graphic could scare you. And it also scares me. It scares me a lot because it's a huge amount of traffic and huge amount of malicious traffic which we should process. And fortunately, due to our design and our very huge Anycast network, we could handle this traffic without any service interruption for our customers. I would like to prepare a brief talk about our DNS system design. But I want to start from databases. We have two different worlds of databases. So we have relational databases, and we have key-value storage. If you look for internet about benefits and the disadvantages of each of them, so you could find a lot of holivars about. We decided to use both of them because one of them has a very big number of benefits for reliably storing records. And we use a relational database to store customer records, customer information. But to deliver this information to our edges, sometimes across very non-reliable networks, we use key-value store, custom key-value store with option to replicate all changes in a few seconds across the planet. So when a customer changes something in our management panel, or our engineers change something, or our support team change something, we fill this information into a relational database. Then our magic tool, DNS data pipeline, converts this information, process it, and specially optimize it for DNS lookups, and push it to a globally replicated key-value store. And as final step, using this key-value store, we deliver this information to our edges. And finally, we could serve it to our customers using our custom DNS software, RRDNS. What is RRDNS? RRDNS is written completely in Go language. We really like this language because it offers very fast development time and very affordable performance. And another option why we decided to use Go, because we have very nice and reliable library for crafting and parsing DNS requests from Mike Gibbon. And I would like to say thank you, Mike, for this awesome software. It's really, really nice. We have model designed to introduce new options without affecting our monolith code. And definitely we have filters, we have models, we have hooks, we have everything what do you want if you want to change some behavior in a few cases. And as I mentioned before, we use custom globally replicated key-value store for storing this information. When we started this project, we had a lot of technical issues with old subsystem. For example, we have poor performance. We use it very not so very fast and and bloated encoding format. We used protobuf previously. And we store all information as different RR types into this key-value store. For example, if customer have 10 different records for Apex domain, we will look up 10 different keys to provide this information to customers. And unfortunately, this code was so complicated to maintain because it had monolithic design, a lot of global variables, and if I want to change something, it was pretty complicated in so much time. But I'm speaking about technical sides. It's not about business. We have business requirements for us as DNS team, and this requirements was to scale to 100 million domains, to provide better performance, and to provide options to deliver new options and new products very fast. And another very important requirement to migrate all of these 5.5 million domains without any service interruption, without having switch day, without making all changes in one very, very, very scarce hour. So, from technical side, after thinking about business requirements and technical issues of previous product, we decided to introduce more scalable data encoding into our new RDNS version. So we decided to use message pack for such purpose. Also, we found a few problems also mentioned on previous OARC meetings about implementation of RFC standards, and we decided to fix them. Also, as I mentioned before, we had a pretty big number of analytics. We log all requests, we log everything. And using this data, we prepared a lot of reports and spent so much nights thinking about how we could improve it. So then we decided to use this information to improve design of our DNS daemon. And as new RR types are arriving very, very often, we decided to remove requirement to change some code inside our RDNS daemon to add new RR types. And definitely we want to have more maintainable code. So, as one part of our data-based optimization, we decided to optimize lookup paths for A and quad A records, and also NS records, because we have about 18% of requests about these records. So we decided to optimize it as much as possible. So we decided to use new schema design for our key-value store, and instead of storing each RR type in different key, we decided to store each RR set in different key, and it did increase performance a lot. And also we want to have predictable behavior in case of technical sides of our software. And also we want to have very, very strong and transparent behavior in case of business terms. How it will handle this case, how it could handle this case. And we want to decide to fix it and provide a very, very, very reliable behavior of our DNS server. After this migration, we found that we accidentally increased our DNS service about 3 times. I don't think it's surprising, because when we change its schema format, when we change it storage format and increase it modularity of our code, we expected this behavior, but we're still surprised because it's very, very nice to have it. Also, we improved behavior previously broken in our previous version of our DNS software, And we implemented mixed node DNS for transparent and smooth migration from old DNS backend to new one. And finally, we really like this code. If somebody asks me, Pavel, please change this one, I like to change it because it's nice. So, as mentioned before, we fixed a few issues with RFC implementation. And finally, my teammate Tom will continue this talk about DNS data pipeline implementation. Thank you.
So as Pavel mentioned, there's two key components of a DNS infrastructure that we have. So there's the data system, the data pipeline that provisions data from our core database, which is a RDBMS, and then it processes the data, applies business logic to the records and the DNS data, and then it writes it to a replicated KB store. Essentially, that's this very simple flow. The part I'm going to talk about here is twofold. First, the service that does this serialization and applies the business logic, and the second is a bit about how we moved from this old system to the new system. The thing to remember here is that as we rewrote and changed large components of our DNS, the data model changed a lot. So we essentially rewrote this data pipeline in tandem with changing our DNS so that we could move to these new systems completely. So the old pipeline. I think the V1 version of this pipeline is possibly was the oldest piece of infrastructure at Cloudflare running in production. It's about six years old, and it was written in a combination of PHP, C, C++, and Bash. Was possibly the most unstable system and really needed changing. So about 2 years ago, Oliver and a few other people at Cloudflare decided that we needed to rewrite this and then also to rewrite our DNS. And that's kind of how this started. So it had very poor performance, especially for large zones. So where we would take the zone data for zones that had thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of records to the edge wasn't performant enough. We needed to be able to scale much more than that. The other thing was that we weren't able to offer good processing times for these large zones and even small zones. It was very all over the place. We were unable to say, 50% of these zones will be built in a certain amount of time and to be able to propagate these changes to the edge quickly. So we really wanted a new predictable system to solve that. Essentially what we wanted was to completely rewrite the storage. As Pavel mentioned, we were storing data per RR, which is not as efficient as it could be. And we also didn't have any optimizations for common query patterns, so A, quad A, NS, things like that. We wanted to be able to guarantee low propagation time. So it's really important that we were able to say, for the large majority of zones, if they fall within this category, we will be able to provide you propagation within a certain time frame. That's from the user making a change all the way through us applying business logic and then it being visible at the edge. Predictable behavior. Again, these are old systems that have grown over time. So inevitably, there are all sorts of very interesting, weird behaviors that creep in that aren't intentional. And the problem we have with a number of zones is that often customers will create their DNS setup and get to a stage where it works, and then they'll just leave it, and then they just assume that it's fine. Even if they're relying on behavior that is essentially broken, it doesn't matter to them, it works for them, so we can't go around breaking these kind of bugs and fixing them, which then results in taking their site down. So we wanted to be able to have a good solid understanding of how exactly the system worked. And also we wanted to be able to handle bursts gratefully. So there are cases when we want to be able to change DNS data quickly and do large spikes, and that's something that the old system didn't handle very well. So we wanted to be able to support that. So what did we end up with? So we rewrote the system in Go. We love Go at Cloudflare. It scales linearly with a number of CPUs, which is great. It's a parallel system. It allows us to build more and more zones as we get more and more changes. And again, this is a new system, so we have good test coverage, which is nice. Again, also well documented. So these are things that you don't necessarily think about when working on these systems. But with a company like us, where we have a large support team and large operations team, it's important that when I'm asleep or when Pavel is asleep, the SRE team and the support team are able to understand exactly why things are happening and help customers fix issues. Also, as part of this process, we worked very closely with the SRE and operations team. Again, this is something that people often overlook, but for us it proved invaluable because it allowed us to focus on implementing things as opposed to firefighting problems with a new or old system. So it's great to engage those through the process. What we ended up with was nice guaranteed propagation time. So with all the metrics and tracking that we have, we can provide good SLAs on exactly how long it takes to process zones of certain size with certain features and provide that to the edge. And we ended up with about a 10 times performance gain from the user making a change and then being visible at the edge. So I have a rather sad graph which shows the monitoring, if you can see that, the monitoring that we have on propagation changes. So this is the time it takes for a customer to make a change to their zone and it to be served at the edge. Each dot here is a probe that's measuring from a different place in the world. These crazy lines that you see are when the old pipeline would break. This is over a 12-hour period of a particularly sad day where the worst case propagation delay was up to almost 2 hours, which is pretty sad. So this was really what we wanted to fix. We wanted to make sure that we had a nice stable system that didn't have all these problems. What we ended up with was this. So this is the new system over the same time period. So here you can see the dots more clearly. Each dot here is a probe measuring the propagation time, and you can see that we didn't suffer the same problems that the old system did. So I'm going to talk a bit about how we migrated from the old system to the new one. As Pavel mentioned, we implemented like a mixed mode feature in our DNS, which would allow us to serve the zones from the old system and the new system one by one, so that we could slowly, gradually move zones across without having to have one big scary day when we would move from the old system to the new system. Because one thing that is absolutely not acceptable is that we can't take customer websites down. If we do that, then no one will have any trust in our product. So it's important that we migrate smoothly. We used a few tools to do that. So I'm going to talk in a minute about the DNS Mirror, which is a piece of software that we have which samples production DNS queries and replays those queries against multiple binaries and then can compare the outputs. So this was a really useful tool to be able to say, how do we know that this works? Okay, well, based on the sampled production traffic, the answers are the same and it's safe. We also did full comparisons. So before migrating any zone, we ran every single DNS name in the zone through the comparison to make sure that the zone answered exactly the same for both the old system and the new system. And also, every time we discovered a new bug, we covered it religiously with a test case. So this means that we've ended up with a really nice test suite that covers all of the features and functions that we support in the DNS pipeline and also our DNS. So it's allowed us to kind of end up with something really nice. So the other thing was to treat this migration as a production system. So often with these things, you build old systems and new systems, and then you forget about the process of migrating to them. This process took a few months, and essentially we treated the migration itself as an automated tool that was production. So we had metrics, we had monitoring, we engaged the support team and the operations team while doing the migration. And you can see here two graphs. The top graph shows you the pass rate of how many zones were failing the migration and passing the migration to start with, and then towards the end. So the approach that we took was to start migrating zones and testing out to see how the new system fared, even though we knew that there would be some issues. So to start with, we ended up with about a 50% pass rate, which was, given that we'd completely rewritten this system, was okay. And basically, we just kept iterating to try and find issues, finding categories of problems that we could solve, and then would migrate more and more. The goal was always to migrate to 99% of zones because 100% is a bit scary because there are always going to be one or two customers that have very crazy things. So we basically kept moving and moving until we narrowed down this kind of failure rate to such a small percentage that at the end of the day we were able to migrate every zone that was tested. So the DNS Mirror. It samples real DNS traffic from the Cloudflare network, and we compare the answers between the two systems. This is something that we use as part of all our DNS releases to make sure that we don't introduce accidental regressions. As people may know, people will do all sorts of very weird queries to the DNS, and they may well be relying on a particular behavior that we're not aware of. So it's important that we don't introduce behaviors that break someone that's using our DNS in a way that we didn't previously know about. So here's a screenshot of the dashboard that we have. So for every release, we usually run a mirror for a few days, which allows us to get a good sample of production queries from all of our POPs and then make sure that it's a stable release. So the total time to migrate from the old system to the new one was about a year. The migration took about 3 months. This is going from the system just being deployed to production and then having 99% of zones on Cloudflare. Lots of new test cases, lots of pull requests, and lots of releases. This was a constant effort to make sure that we were able to get this done. Again, involving the SRE and operations team was a great idea because it allowed us to focus on developing and fixing the issues that we found as opposed to kind of constantly firefighting issues. That's it. Any questions?
Hello. Shane Kerr from Oracle, and I think this is a question for Pavel. You mentioned that you stopped using protobuf because the performance was low. Is that correct?
Yes, but we used not so recent versions of library to craft it and decode it for serving to customers on our edges.
Okay.
And also we used some kind of incorrect implementation of protobuf, because sometimes to enhance some fields we used JSON inside of protobuf, and it increased complexity of our stack a lot.
Okay, so I guess, do you think that, so is it more about the way that you were using the protobuf than the core technology then?
I couldn't say for other departments, but from our DNS side, we're moving away from protobuf.
Okay. I think the reason this stuck out to me was because I think DNS TAP uses protobuf as its underlying technology, and there's actually been kind of a push and a movement towards DNS TAP, and if what we're hearing is that it's not the right solution, then I think as a community we should consider this kind of a red flag and maybe think about this issue seriously.
So for us, the key reason we moved away from Protos was we were using an older version, which was a good chance for us to rethink the most efficient process, but also that protobuf is a very tightly schemaed system, whereas we wanted to have a very transparent move from the way that the data pipeline was generating data and it being available to be used in our DNS, which meant if we were using protobufs, there would be several phases where we would have mappings between schemas. That mapping is quite challenging to maintain, and the way that we solved that previously was by not using a schema. And that also has downsides. So the compromise that we found was using message pack, which is like a binary JSON, essentially, which has schemas but is flexible. And also directly integrates with Meek's DNS library if you compile it with Go. So it allowed us to kind of get rid of a lot of maintenance burden of using Protos. And yeah, that's essentially the reason why.
Okay.
Christian Pedro, Denik. I have one question about the second version. In the first version, I've heard the presentation of Filippo at 2015 in Amsterdam about this packet optimization with NSEC Epsilon and this no error signing, where if you sign an NSEC, you create an NSEC record and you have only one answer, not the wildcard and the domain, and you could discuss if this is really RFC 4470 conform, and you say now you have full RFC conformity. Did you change something?
I don't think that we changed this behavior because it's originally was written by Filippo and we still use it in new system of our DNS.
Okay.
And it works really well.
Okay, thank you.
Giovanni, SIDN. So, great work. I'm just wondering, because this is more the software you have developed, and part of the performance is, of course, is software and scalability and everything. And I work more on the Anycast side, and part of the equation is also the Anycast. So I'm not sure if you guys have worked with that, but how you actually evaluate the performance from the point of view of users, experience like the latency and RTT, coupled, like that has a lot to do with Anycast and with the software. Have you done any work on that too?
So currently the monitoring that we have that I showed in those graphs is based on, that particular monitoring is purely for measuring propagation times. So that's actually deployed, we have a load of probes running in different places. We currently don't have a really solid way of monitoring DNS specifically from eyeballs. That said, that's something that we'd like to do, and a good example of how we could do that with something like the Atlas probes. And I was at the hackathon with you recently, where that might be a good avenue, or potentially doing something in the browser. But right now, we do measure performance and things from probes that we deploy over the Anycast network. We don't run this monitoring from inside our POPs. But we don't have a good way right now for like actual eyeball testing.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. If we don't have more questions, thank you. So for our next presentation, Andre Suri from CCNIC, he's going to help us to understand this eternal question, if does parent delegations and name servers, TTL, matter or not?
Hi, my name is Andrzej Suri and I work for Seasoning. And I'm actually, the goal of this presentation is to raise some discussion on this topic. Because recently there was the Fujiwara draft at IETF who proposed the changes, how we should handle the delegation NS. And we've been asked as a CCTLD to lower the TTL in the parent, and I don't think anybody has really looked into how the DNS resolver implementations handle the matter. So, and I thought I knew, and yeah, the DNS has always ways how to surprise me. And so here are some results I discovered. So here are the 4 test subjects. I had to use node resolver from, this is basically the master branch, but with some comments on top of it to be able to peek into the cache inside from Lua. The last version of Unbound. And actually, in the end, I tested both binds 9.10 latest and 9.11 latest, and they behave the same. And the latest version of the Power DNS recursor as well. I didn't have time to add more to the list, and so the test setup, I have this experimental zone I use for breaking DNS, and it's called udp53.cz. And all the domains I'm talking about are live at the moment. And it's a matrix of TTL values where no is 0, low is something like hour, high is something like day, and max is something like 30 days. And this is one axis. The other one is the answer minimization. Who doesn't know what answer minimization is? So I can explain it to you.
Oh, explain it.
Okay. Okay, I will explain. When you ask for, let's say, a record, then the DNS server has an option to return some additional records in the authority like the NS servers. And the answer minimization just kills that. So it just return the A record without any additional data. The benefit is that the answer is smaller, but there are some drawbacks as well, and I'll show them to you. So this is another axis which say it's answer minimization enabled or not. And then is the child zone signed and delegated from the parent. So does it have a DS record and it's properly signed or not? And then there's axis where the NS records are in domain, means they're the same as the domain in bailiwick, in the same like parent zone, or completely external. So this is the 4 axes of the matrix. In total, it's 46 zones I had to create. And the zone pattern is like parent TTL, which is name of this sub-project, the TTL axis, the answer minimization axis, the DNS axis, and the NS type axis, and the zone udp53.cz, which is sort of TLD for those zones. So here are some examples how those zones look like, and they are all live, so you can test it after you think about it. The test script is really simple. It's a series of digs, and then I look into the cache. So the first 5 digs just ask for A, quad A, MX, A, quad A for a subzone. And then I peek into the cache with the no recursive flag and look what the TTL of the NS record is. After that, I issue a single NS query, recursive one, and see what happens again with the peeking into the cache. There are some quirks to that, like you need to configure the servers and for node resolver, it doesn't have like you can't peek into the cache with dig, so you need to write a Lua script and use this special command. So it will give the answers. Funny thing is, because node-resolver use, like many of the other DNS servers, but it uses the SO reuse port, you can launch multiple servers at the same port. And I had a mistake in my testing script. So on every test, I just launched it more and more resolvers. So I had like hundreds of them running, and then I was getting inconsistent results, and I was like writing to the team, we have a serious bug there, and in the end, it was just multiple node resolvers running on the same port. So it was my mistake. In the end, what has effect on the DNS server behavior? I found out that the only consistent effect on the DNS resolver behavior in terms of what gets into the cache or not is the answer minimization. That has a huge impact on what TTL you will see in the cache. Then some things are like implementation specific. Actually, the Power DNS guys will probably comment on that. The direct NS query, in some cases, it doesn't update the TTL in their cache, and it should be fixed in the master branch of the Power DNS recursor. But for bind, I spoke to IC people, and it's intentional that it behaves like this. So the answer is not clear for all those. So for bind, it ignores if the child NSTTL is longer than the parent NSTTL. It just ignores the value and uses the minimum value of those. And it also ignores the, even if it's shorter than the parent, it ignores the value if the child is unsigned. I'm sure there will be fruitful discussion with Mark about that. Definitely I will engage Mark and talk to him why he chose to implement this like this. So the answer minimization effects on DNS caching is, when used in the parent zone, so if you enable the answer minimization like in TLD or root zone, it has no effect on caches. And it has effect on response size. So you probably should do that in the higher you are in the DNS tree, you should enable the answer minimization. Also because the higher you are, then it's probably you have more resources running those DNS servers. So the attackers could use your DNS servers for reflection attacks. So you want to minimize the DNS responses as much as possible. But when used in the children's zone, it might have the effect that the NSRS TTL will never get updated unless somebody issues the direct NS query. So to answer the question I raised in the beginning, does parent delegation NSTTL matter? The answer is maybe. My conclusion for most DNS resolvers, excluding the bind because it happens in different way, and also excluding the nominum server because I know they handle the parent delegation NS different than all others servers. I haven't studied Microsoft DNS because I don't have any Windows servers around me, sadly. I think that it has the minimum effect on existing domain names because in most cases the child NSTTL overrides the parent NSTTL, but answer minimization removes that effect. So, and what? Okay, maybe I did this. I should. But the parent TTL, the longer the parent TTL is, it has a big impact on non-existing domain names, specifically for TLEs. It could be remedied by fixing the TTL in the SOA record because that's what has the effect on the negative caching. So for the benefit of the users, I argue that you should have this, for negative caching, the value in lower ranges, and also when error is made. So imagine a domain holder by mistake putting wrong DNS servers in this parent zone, and it gets cached. And it gets cached if you don't want to have a long or short TTL for all the zones, you should allow this to be configurable. But this is, I would guess it's a big task because it would need change in EPP and stuff like that. The other thing would be to implement the child-to-parent synchronization DNS so you can sync the TTL from the C-sync record. For the DNS resolvers, I think that apart from the protection from ghost domains, which needs some cap for the max TTL, that the DNS resolvers should update the TTL from the child NS records every time, even if it's longer than the parent. For the answer minimization, because there are more and more authoritative DNS servers that enable the answer minimization by default or have an option to turn it on, that there might be an option to serve the client with the answer he asked for, and then internally schedule the NS query not visible to the end user, just internally to schedule the NS query to update the NS records when the resolver has a little bit of time when doing nothing. So some low priority internal query to update the NS records inside the caches. I call it post prefetching. For the child zones DNS operators, you should enable the answer minimization if you care about the traffic, if you care about the making you less usable in case of DDoS attacks as a reflection DNS servers. You should enable the answer minimization and make the responses as small as possible. But if you care about the caches and the TTL, you should probably enable the answer minimization. So there's no clear answer about what's right and what's wrong. That's it. I put all my scripts in the GitHub, so you can download them and play with them. It needs some more setup, like in the where the DNS servers listen on what port and stuff like that. Most of it is configurable. Some of it doesn't, but you can use it to test against your DNS server. Also, I'm looking for a way how to test Google public DNS, because this scripts needs a clear cache when you start testing. So it's I can run it in theory against Google public DNS, but then I would have to wait a full month before I can do that again. It's suboptimal. Thank you for listening, and I expect some of you might have some questions, comments, or, well, pull requests. How much time? Okay. Dwayne?
Hi, Andre. It's Dwayne Wessels from VeriSign. So I think this is really great. Thank you for doing this, especially because I think in one of the upcoming versions of Bind, answer minimization will be on by default. And I think that may catch some people by surprise. But we're considering it. Okay. It has been proposed. About your post-prefetching, does that not defeat the purpose of answer minimization?
No.
It's
because it can be used for a reflection attack.
Yeah, but it's the same or more work for the server.
It is, but it's not work for the target of the attack.
Okay, so yeah, if you're worried about attackers, then
Yeah.
then it's good. But okay.
And you can use stuff like DNS cookies to authenticate this NS post prefetching, whatever. You can use more defenses there.
Thanks.
Hi, Andre. Oliver from Cloudflare. I like this. Very good. Yes, TTL should be lower in the parents. You were looking at the TTL issue. Did you ever look at what happened if the contents of the NS sets between parent and children is different? Or in your case, you didn't do that?
No, I didn't do that for this presentation or this research.
Yeah, but I agree with you. Resolvers should be doing background NS checks. Many of the resolvers writers I have proposed those to in the past have said, no, it's extra work, no gain, but there's lots of disjoint NS records in parents and children. And so until we automate getting that fixed, we need something like this. And also, there is a way to Google without ever having to wait for them, because you can use their public API to purge the cache globally.
Oh, okay.
OpenDNS provides the same thing. I don't know about L3, but so, yeah.
Okay.
So you can just test them too.
Okay, I'll look into it. Thank you for the tip. I didn't know about that.
Hi, Andre, Rowan from SurfNet. Great talk. About the minimization on or off, there's also a middle ground, because something, I believe the implementation in NSD, I don't know if it still does that, but used to sort of limit the answer to below MTU, or you could configure a sort of a maximum minimum size, if that makes sense. That could be a middle ground where you say, well, you can add some additional stuff as long as it stays below this limit, and then you sort of limit reflection power over amplification power, but you gain some of the benefits of extra stuff in your packet.
Right, yeah. But I strongly believe that the resolvers should implement the background fetches.
Hi, Matt Poundset. Yeah, thanks for this. This is really interesting. I had a comment about your recommendation at the end that resolvers should always update the TTL from the child, even if it's longer. I think getting into what the resolver algorithm is probably opening a messy can of worms right now. But I would say that if we were writing this protocol today, I would say that should be use the shorter of the two TTLs regardless. Otherwise, if you always went with the child TTL, then you're opening up the possibility for people to create zombie domains, which is not such a good thing. Yeah.
Hence the bullet underneath.
Yeah.
You should limit it to some reasonable maximum TTL.
I would say the TTL of the parent is the reasonable maximum.
But if we move the parent TTLs to 1 hour, then it creates too much fluctuation for the domains that doesn't need to have that dynamics.
Yeah, but that should be up to the parent. Like it's their servers that have to do most of that work.
Let me respond to that. If the parent is under attack and can't be reached, then the children's own ability to update the TTL to some longer value before the parent goes offline might limit the impacts of the attack on the parent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. All right. It's complicated.
It's DNS after all.
Hello, Robert Edmonds from Fastly. Thank you for this presentation. If we are opening up the resolver algorithm, can of worms, does it make sense to, instead of having the child overwrite the parent or update it, to cache them separately to avoid, impacts, side effects of modifications in the child from causing, more frequent queries to the parent or something like that?
What TTL would the resolver use to refresh its records if you keep it separate?
So
then it would be always parent, wouldn't you?
So if you cache them separately, and you query the parent and you get a 2-day TTL, and then you go and talk to the child and it says, I have a 1-minute TTL, well then you can, if that 1 minute TTL expires, you go back up to the parent. But you have a 2-day TTL on the record from the parent, so you don't actually need to query the parent if you
Okay.
keep them, if you cache them separately.
Okay, that makes sense. And if it's otherwise, like well, for parent has a 1 minute and the child has a 2 day, would that work? Yeah, we need to think this through. Right.
Ray Bellis from ISC, following up on Dwayne. Yeah, in 9.12 we are very strongly considering making minimal responses the default. We would very much like to get community feedback on whether that's a good thing or not. The main rationale for doing this is not actually to address the stuff you've discussed today, Andre, but actually because it's very good for performance of the name server. Not having to retrieve those additional records to put in the additional section or whatever basically makes your name server faster. That's the main reason we're thinking about doing that.
Yes, and we did the same for the same reasons, because it improves performance for the DNS servers a lot.
So, Ed Lewis, now at ICANN. In the past, I've worked with large TLD at a TLD operator, and this question came up a lot of times. We would discuss this between the TLD operators, what should we set the TTL for? And we thought the trade-off, according to the protocol engineering side, was longer TTLs, lower DNS traffic, right? But we found that we had two adversaries out there. One are recursive server operators, or recursive server implementers who do tricks like this. And the TTLs we set out there didn't seem to matter at all. We had some self-inflicted attacks where we thought people wouldn't notice it because the TTL was so long, but they came back anyway. So we knew right away that trade-off wasn't working. But the other thing I want to bring up, the other adversary are the people who hijack zones. And the reason why, I think one of the reasons behind some of the length or the trimming of the child TTL down to the parent came as a reflection of, if I hijack your zone, I can put a huge TTL out there and own it even after the mitigation's gone in. So it's interesting to look at this over and over again, because back in the good old days, we thought it was simple, longer TTL, lower traffic, but now it's becoming apparent that recursive servers need to be aggressive finding answers. I talked something about that in the previous event, that was the ICANN thing. But also the bad guys out there they have a way to lengthen, if you like the child is the authoritative, it's the more trustworthy according to RC 2181. But if the child's not trustworthy, it's a bad thing. So it's not an easy question what should be done. I don't even know what I would recommend for a recursive server, but get the answer is always the number one thing, and do what needs to be done there. So for the TLDs, we have to go back and say, the old trade-off of longer TTL, less queries, that's not there. Don't try that. And a better recommendation probably has to come out for what should be up there. So.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, this is Oliver from Cloudflare again. Robert's question made me realize that there's a fundamental flaw in the DNS protocol. It's called the NS record
really?
on two places. So, what is the meaning of the NS record of parent? What is that? Should that have been a separate type than what we have in the child? Strictly speaking, the NS record at the parent is a proof of existence of the child and is only a hint on how to reach the child. So if we had a delegation record at the parent and NS record at the child, that would have solved most of these problems that we're dealing with today. Yeah. So I think parent is only providing a hint, and they should be ignored after that.
Do you have a time machine?
Nah, it took a long time to get this answer out of Paul Moka-Petrus. Yeah, that this was probably not the best idea.
We look forward to your draft.
That will be part of the NSV2.
Hey, Jan Chalak, NS1. Thank you for the presentation. I don't have a question. I just would like to comment on the Google public question that someone raised. Because I remember when we enabled query minimization on Node DNS, which was in September 2015, there was a question from Robert Edmonds, he questioned our decision of doing this change. And there was a big discussion on DNS operations, and I actually did an experiment with Google resolvers. I wanted to try out if the resolver prefers the parent or child NS. I didn't play with TTL. I played with the names of the servers. And what I found out at the time was that Google resolvers just trust what's in a parent. And even if you query directly for the NS record in a child, it doesn't update the cache and still like sticks to the names to the servers in a parent.
Okay, thanks.
I just want to again emphasize that answer minimization is really all about server performance. It's not about protecting for denial of service attacks. If you're going to attack me, I'd much rather suck down 1,500 byte packets than 100 byte packets. It's the packets that really matter. That's what kills you in the denial of service. So small packets are actually working a little bit against us in that case. And so really it's all about the server performance.
Okay.
Paul Hoffman, I want to reply to something that Olafur just said, which was, oh yes, this is a good idea if we sort of not deprecate parent NS, but say it's just a hint. He said, oh, we'll do this in DNS v2. I absolutely think that it's reasonable for us in this operational group to propose now, and again, we haven't heard from Mark Andrews yet, but, but we will, and but I think it's reasonable if we agree, and I think from seeing your data and the other anecdotal stuff we've been hearing in the last 15 minutes here at the mic, I think it's reasonable for us as an operational community to say, there are different interpretations of this. We don't need a strict interpretation. We believe maybe, and again, I'm just speaking off the top of my head, not having thought about this a lot, but we believe that parental NS is just a suggestion. We can say that now, because if it takes 10 or 15 years for something to happen, that's simply pulling down the number of places where we're going to have a mystery.
Okay.
So having fewer mysteries, I think, would be better.
Okay. If you want to co-author the draft, raise a hand now. Okay.
Yep, cool. I'm not looking behind me. Is it you and I?
So, Matt?
Okay, great. So let's talk about that afterwards.
Alex Mayo for Nick.at. I specifically chose to like the tail of the queue because I have something in mind that's not directly related to your work, but sort of like a similar topic. And specifically, I was thinking about running like a project that does sort of like the empiric test of how a query pattern at the parent name server changes if the client TTL of a busy domain name changes. So it is like in my cache of project ideas. So if you're interested in something like that, I simply would like to find a way to normalize like the query pattern of a domain name by whatever set of client TTLs they have, whether it's DNS, A, quad A, whatever. So I'm like, if somebody's interested in that work.
I am. Send me an email. If I don't respond, send me another email and
repeat
and rinse.
I'm going to hit you down in front. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Kathy Almond, ISC. Back to what Olafur said about considering breaking up the authority of the parent and the child, and also channeling what I've heard Mark's view on the matter is, we could consider that the parent is authoritative for the delegation because they own the zone that is being delegated from, whereas the child is owning the zone that has been delegated to it. So there's two levels of authority. There is the level of the authority of the delegation, which comes from the parent, therefore you should believe that. And then there is the authority from the zone itself.
Yeah. Okay. So no more questions?
Thank you, Andre.
Thank you for your questions. So we're finishing this morning session. We're going to have a break now for lunch, and we're resuming at 2 o'clock. So thank you.